been allowed to have a conversation, say, the way other communities have about empire and exploitation.
My name's John Pandit. I've been here in London for 30 years, and I'm sort of nowadays a musician, part-time carer, political activist, this and that.
My name's Anita Sharma. I'm originally from Leicester. I studied in Sheffield, lived in Coventry, came down to London 12 years ago. I've worked in the voluntary sector throughout, law centre, refugee legal centre, and now work for an organisation called Inquest, working with families of people who have died in custody, advising and supporting them through the inquest process and working with their lawyers. Find out what happened to them.
My name's Anwar. I'm the director of the Samosa project, which works across media and communications and development projects between Britain and Pakistan.
I've got mixed heritage, so I'm sort of see myself as son of immigrants, born and brought up in the UK. I only speak English. I don't speak. My father from India, my mother from Ireland. I don't speak Indian languages. I understand when my mother-in-law was shouting at me in Punjabi. I understand that. But I think so. When you're of mixed heritage and you're born and brought up in this country, I think you have a different. So if you don't, you have your identity is different, and it changes, and your perception of yourself and perception of other people around you. That shifts as well, and it's something you see over the years.
It's the best of both worlds in some ways. Sort of very rich, deep cultural background, contrasted with sort of a kind of British Asian, I suppose, upbringing, which is, you know, the influences of the English culture that I've grown up in, that's set within the Asian culture. So I think if you can marry the two together, which I think you can, it's quite fascinating.
The identity issues around British-born Islam, British-born Muslims has come much more to the fore, obviously, post 9/11. But growing up as British Asians, I think there was a kind of commonality of experience between, I had lots of Hindu friends and Sikh friends as well as Muslim friends. And whilst we followed different religions and we all came from profoundly religious Orthodox families, one would think of oneself as a British Asian.
I think there is a sense of pride with that, because I think part of, like you were saying, John, you know, we're British Asians and we live in this country and we're, you know, assimilated into it, but until you're actually seen as British, you know, you're not necessarily. So
I grew up in the countryside, so I had an idyllic English upbringing. I am always confused about my identity still and previously. It's not so much what you think you are as what other people perceive you to be. And so that has changed. Even we see ourselves as, say, second generation Asian. Even the term Asian, when I was a kid, wasn't even there. You're Indian, Pakistani. And now you're defined more by your geographical origins or your cultural affiliations like religion. And how you define yourself is often set in the time where you've made that understanding of yourself.
I was born and lived in a predominantly Asian area up to the age of 11. So my whole cultural influences were very, very much Indian and Asian. So, you know, we had Muslim, Sikh, Gujarati, Hindus, a whole variety of people around us, but pretty much everyone in that whole vicinity in school very much felt that way as well. We moved at the age of 11, we moved to an area where we were the only Asian family on the whole street, and had a lot of sort of negative interest, should I say. We had racial attacks, sort of neighbours, children not understanding and making various gestures, sort of, you know. So that was interesting until we settled more into it. And we weren't the sort of family that kind of sat back and let people come and sort of racially abuse us and kind of hide. My dad and my brothers kind of went out there and chased them off, and so it kind of had an influence in terms of how the neighbours also?
I grew up in Manchester, so everything was about Manchester. But I spent a lot of time as a child going to Pakistan. I was taken on various trips during my infant and primary years, during the summer holidays, to my village where my parents had their roots.
When I first went abroad travelling, the shock on people's faces to see an Indian woman travelling with, two of us, me and Varsha, but the shock on people's faces, 2 Indian women back.
And so I think it's a lot easier now. Perhaps difficulties, when issues like if your parents are religious or they're from different religious heritages, that can be more confusing.
It does get easier. There's more integration, there's more understanding, there's more acceptance, more merging of the cultures as well. So there's more intermarriages. So things aren't as black and white as they used to be. Much more culturally diverse.
And I would say to young people, be what you want and don't worry about anyone else. Define your own identity. It's not for anyone else to tell you who you are. If you're a British Asian, you're a British Asian. If you're a Brit, you're a Brit. If you feel you've got more affinity to one place than the other, that's absolutely your prerogative.
Both my parents worked in the NHS. They were brought over in the 50s. They only knew that adult lives was around Britain and England, what England was. And even when my dad went back to India, I don't think he understood it as much as, or he felt as comfortable as when he was here, even though he always strived to go back at some stage. And I think, and that's passed down to us, and we can't get away from that. It's never ours. And it's not our country. We never really, even though, for me anyway, this is my personal thing, it's never my country. It's not something I have any particular allegiance to. And that's something that's grown as I've grown. And I'm not, now at my age, I'm more interested in a wider notion of citizenship.
Any kind of young person growing up is going to have to work out what they are and define themselves. I think there is an issue with particularly British Asians and British Muslims where you've got very strong religious identities, and often those are connected to proselytising or campaigning or very out there religious orthodox organisations trying to put forward one school of Islam. And then you've got, what can be seen as a very Western kind of, you must integrate.
My experience of time in Pakistan is there is actually a lot of goodwill towards Britain in Pakistan. I suspect it's the same in India.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've got mixed feelings about it. Maybe it's because the violence of partition was actually aimed at the English. And the English, I think the worst excesses of England's time in India was like the East India Uprising.
It's more down to people's religious identity rather than a national identity. Or perhaps regional, so Punjabi heritage, for example, but not, say, Indian. I just think that's the way it's going. And I think perhaps that's just how people reflect on countries and what countries mean. And the notion of nationhood. And it's something that's dissolving quite rapidly, particularly in the last 30 years through globalisation.
Always have been very connected to my Asian heritage. Always been quite interested in the sort of cultural aspects of it, the religious aspects. I have this real kind of rebellious attitude in terms of the religion, but in order to rebel, I felt I needed to understand it better.
If you're born somewhere and you grow up somewhere, that is a huge part of your identity, that's it. So, I am what I am, and I was born and grew up in Britain. I'm not really interested in what other people think of what my identity is or what my culture is. I'm someone that's always been involved in setting up projects around culture, around the arts, and making kind of cultural activity. So I am my own culture, and it's not for anyone else to tell me what my culture is apart from me. I've got affinities.